I'm making this video as a follow-up to a video I posted a couple weeks ago. You might have seen it. It was me flying this little Piper Cherokee of mine into Chicago O'Hare International Airport. Yeah, day VFR, I flew that little single-engine piston into the 4th busiest airport in the entire world. So I had a number of people reach out to me and ask me about some of the prep work I did. I referenced a few different things in the video about what I did to prepare for this trip. Now before I get into all that, let's start with the story behind this. It was my birthday weekend, and I was flying to Chicago to meet some friends for dinner in Rosemont. If you don't know the Chicago area, Rosemont is basically right next door to O'Hare. And as you look at the other airports in the Chicago area, there really aren't any that are convenient to Rosemont. It was going to be a half-hour to 40-minute car ride after I landed just to get to the restaurant. So I got to thinking. I had seen a number of videos of different people flying airplanes, general aviation airplanes into Chicago, single-engine piston, so I knew it could be done. And so I figured, what the heck? I'm going to give it a try. I'm going to see if I can fly my Cherokee into O'Hare. So as I thought about those videos, I started thinking about the different lessons that I had learned from them. And one of the first lessons I learned, and you hear this a lot, if you want to go flying into a Bravo airspace, call TRACON and let them know you're coming and coordinate a good time to arrive. So that's what I did. I looked up the phone number, I called Chicago TRACON, and you know what they said? They said, we're not the right department. Let me send you to the right place. And they forwarded me to a unit I had never heard of before. It's called the Traffic Management Unit, and it's part of Chicago Center. Now, reading through some materials online, I've discovered since that it sounds like each ARTCC in the U.S., all 20, 21 of them, however many there are, each has a traffic management unit. So I got in touch with them. I started talking to the woman there. I explained to her the situation. I told her, hey, I'm coming down to Chicago. I would like to land at O'Hare. I'm going to be VFR. I'm going to be in my single-engine piston. She asked, when did I want to arrive? And I said, well, just sometime before 5 o'clock because I'm going to this dinner and whatnot. But I really want to be at a time that's best for you. So she made a phone call or two. She contacted a couple people, I guess, at Tower and at TRACON. And she came back and she said, well, look, Saturdays are actually our least busy day. And we have a morning push, but that ends around 8 a.m. So if you could come in sometime between 8 and 8:30, that would be ideal. I said, done. That'll work perfect. I'll get up nice and early. I'll fly down. The last thing she told me was make sure I call in that morning and talk to the TMU again to make sure that it was still a good time because they don't get their traffic flow information until that morning. So she wanted me just to double check and make sure. So then she took down my tail number, my personal information. I think I gave her my cell phone number. And she set it all up. So here we go. I was all set. They knew I was coming. I'm going to go fly into Chicago. Holy cow. But now I got to thinking, what's the next step? I know Chicago is an exceptionally complex airport. In fact, I would say, having looked at a lot of the different Bravo airports in the U.S., it's probably the single most complex airport out there. To explain this a little bit, Chicago O'Hare has 6 parallel runways that run east-west. On top of that, they have 2 crossing runways still that kind of run diagonal across some of those runways. On top of all that, they have this just massive number, I can't even count how many different taxiways and things going on, different ways you can get there, de-icing pads, run-up pads, all sorts of stuff. So it can be exceptionally complex. So what I did was I sat down with that airport diagram and I studied it. I studied it for almost the entire week. I kept coming back to it because I wanted to know where everything was. I wanted to understand it. And what I discovered was there's a couple systems that made this a little easier. First of all, those 6 active runway or those 6 parallel runways, they're broken up. There's 3 on the north side, 3 on the south side, and in between them is the major commercial terminal. The 3 on the north side are all numbered 927, and they're left, right, and center, as you would expect. And then on the south side, you have 1028, left, right, and center. So when I realized that, I'm like, okay, that already makes this easier. Now, the FBO is on the north side, so I was really crossing my fingers and hoping that they would give me 9 or 27, depending on the winds that day. I was pretty much looking at the forecast expecting runway 9. So, okay, I looked at that. That was the first thing. The next thing I noticed was that all of the parallel taxiways were kind of sequential as far as their lettering from north to south. Now they skipped some letters and whatnot, but all of the single letter taxiways were, these parallel ones, or most of them, all the parallel ones are labeled with single letters. Let's put it that way. And so that became another thing and made it like a little easier to understand. So I spent a lot of time with that taxi diagram or with that airport diagram because I wanted to make sure, I figured that would probably be one of the most complex things. The next thing I did, and you see this in the video, is I made a cheat sheet. And I actually made 2 different kinds. So first I made this. This is my quick reference card. And on here, you can see I've got some interesting information. I've got all of the runways listed out. I've got their localizer frequency, the localizer ILS. Now the reason I did that is because with those 6 parallel runways, I wanted to make sure that I had a backup to ensure that whatever runway I was going to land on, I knew for sure I was lined up to the correct runway. I didn't want to pull like a Harrison Ford and land on a taxiway or something, So I made sure I had all of those on a quick reference card. I didn't want to have to pull up an approach plate or something else in order to find that while I'm in the cockpit and I'm trying to search. I wanted it easy. Same thing with the tower frequency. Each one of those runways has its own tower frequency. So 9 left, 2 center right has its own tower frequency, 128.15, and so on and so on and so on, all the way down all of those runways. So I wanted that available. Another lesson I learned flying into Minneapolis was that a 200-foot wide runway can make it really hard to judge your altitude as you're getting ready to flare. So I also I documented on that cheat sheet the runway length and width of each runway, so I knew I'd be prepared for that. And then I also included the elevation. Now I also put the approach frequency on there, but as it turns out, the approach plates for all of those runways all say the same frequency of 119.0, so they all said the same. But the point was to have all of that at hand, super easy when I was on approach. So the other one I made was a full sheet. And on here I have some additional information. Now you can see I've got ground frequencies up here because I knew I would need all sorts of different ground frequencies. They have 3 different ground frequencies for arrivals alone. Plus there's a different one for departures. And you can see I got Unicom frequencies on here, clearance, delivery, all the stuff that I thought I would need. In addition to that, on the back side, I printed that entire taxiway diagram, the entire airport diagram. I wanted it all. And again, you can say, well, Alyssa, you've got 2 iPads in your plane. Why do you need a paper copy? Well, here's the thing. If you've ever flown with an iPad and you're trying to touch things on the iPad as you're either bouncing down a rough taxiway, or worse, you're in the air and you're getting bounced around by winds and such, that can be a lot of pain in the butt. So I just wanted something simple, something where I had all the information in one place that I knew I would need. I wouldn't have to flop around through different screens and things in for flight or whatever. So that cheat sheet really came in handy. I used the ILS frequency. You'll see in the video. Well, the glide slope wasn't working, but the localizer was the important part, and that was there. And that helped me just confirm that I was going to land on the right runway. So I made those cheat sheets. Another thing I did because of the complexity of that airport diagram. All of those taxiways. I hoped they would land me on the north side, but I also knew if they landed me on the south side and I had to get all the way back up to the north side of the airport to get to the FBO, that was going to be some seriously complex set of taxi instructions. So I sat and listened to live ATC for multiple days. I just fired up their ground frequency. Thankfully, live ATC has all of the Chicago ground frequencies on one channel. So it's pretty active all the time. And all I did was I sat there, I practiced writing out the taxi instructions that they were giving different airliners as they landed. And then I went back to the diagram to see if I could figure out where they were sending these planes, how they were getting where they were going. And that did two things for me. One, it made sure that I could keep up with the pace of those instructions the way that ground gives them to you. And it also made sure to get me more familiar with, again, that airport diagram and know where I would be going. So that was actually really a good practice. As it turned out, as you watch in the video, it didn't matter because I didn't even ask for it, and Tower just gave me progressive taxi instructions all the way to the FBO. They did land me on the north side, which was great, on runway 9 left. So, that all worked out really well. But I'm still glad I did that prep work because, man, if they hadn't given me something so easy, it could have been really catastrophic if I wasn't familiar and able to copy down those taxi instructions quickly. All right, so I'm doing all that. This is all prep work for the airport. Now, another thing you may not think about is, what about the FBO? So I'm used to landing at airports and going to the various FBOs. But maybe this is different. They're not used to dealing with aircraft like mine. Are they going to be able to handle me? I went to Kansas City a couple months ago, and it turns out the first FBO I called didn't have 100 low lead. Well, if I need to refuel, I need them to have the right fuel. So I had that thought in the back of my head. So I called up Signature and I made a reservation. One, I wanted to make sure that they had 100 low lead and that they could have a parking area for me, which they did. They just ended up sticking me in with all the rest of the jets that were there. I'm pretty sure I was the only propeller-driven aircraft in that whole area. But the other thing I wanted to do was I had read in an article somewhere that I saw, I think it was Flying Magazine, someone talking about how in order to taxi back out of the FBO, they had to get ground clearance on Unicom just to move on their ramp. It turns out that wasn't the case, but I called ahead to make sure. And I did ask, is there anything special I need to know? Is there anything I should know coming in or anything I need to know to depart? And they confirmed there wasn't anything special. It turns out that's a little false, but we'll get to that in a second. So, made the reservation. I'm all set. Cool. I know I have a place to park. My plan was to park overnight, go to dinner, that way I could have drinks and things, and then I could fly back home the next day legally, being sober and not having had a drink within the last 8 hours. You all know the regulations, right? Okay, cool. But now I got to thinking, all right, I'm flying in this early in the day. I've got a hotel. I can go check in there, but what am I going to do all day? Dinner's not until later in the evening, so I got to wonder if I could get a tower tour. Can't hurt to ask. I called up Chicago Tower. Called up the O'Hare Tower. I talked to a supervisor and said, hey, I know this is last minute, because I think this was actually like the day before or 2 days before. Said, it's my birthday. Could I get a tower tour? And they were excited. Absolutely. Now, I should say, before he was excited, he did ask a number of tough questions. First of all, he asked me if I was going to be able to come in IFR. And I explained to him, no, I am a private pilot. I don't have my instrument rating yet. I'm going to have to come in VFR. He said, that's okay. It just would be a lot easier if you came in IFR. Makes sequencing and everything else easier for approach and whatnot. All right. So we talked about that. He asked if I had looked at the airport diagram. And so I was able to tell him, yeah, I've looked at it and I've studied it. I'm all over this. And then I even told him about what I was planning to do with like the ILS frequencies and all of that. Because I wanted him to be comfortable too. It was obvious why he was asking these questions. I mean, and it turns out later when I did the tower tour, I did find out that they do get, general aviation folks who will come in there and just really don't know what's going on at the airport at all. And so, I didn't want to be that pilot. I wanted to come in prepared. So I told him all about that. We set up the tower tour. That was cool. He gave me instructions, told me where I needed to go, how I would, get access to the tower, etc. Perfect. I actually called back the FBO to make sure that they could get me a shuttle from the FBO to basically the terminal, which is where you get into the tower. So set all that up. And then the day came. The day came. I was ready to take off. I'm all set to go. And went over to the airport, pulled my plane out, started to pre-flight it. 6:30 rolled around. That was the time that they told me I needed to call back to the TMU. So I did. Called into the TMU. Said, hey, I called and set this up the other day, just calling to make sure that this is still good. Kind of acted like you didn't know what was going on. So that made me nervous. But after I talked to him for a minute, explained that I had talked to somebody, he said, all right, let me just make sure. He said, yep, still good. If you get here anytime after 8, we should be fine. We'll be able to work you in. Took down my information again, my tail number and some other things, type aircraft, all that happy stuff. And we were all set. He told me, we'll see you in a little while. And I fired up my plane. And I got going. And you know what? It all worked out great. All that prep work paid off. I came in, my first contact with Chicago Approach, even though I was on flight following in Milwaukee, as you'll see in the other video if you watch it, my first contact with Chicago Approach, they gave me exactly what I expected. She said, November 6355 Juliet, maintain VFR, clear of the Bravo, and say again your destination. And then I replied, and you'll see it in the video. I explained to her that, all right, yep, my destination really is O'Hare, and I cleared this with TMU. So right there, that prep work paid off because there was no way they were going to let me come in unannounced. So, that's the challenge with being VFR and flying in there. Most of the time Chicago's going to tell you we're unable to help you because we're too busy. So, so there's that. That worked out really well. When I got cleared to land for the approach, and they gave me a runway, which she told me pretty much right away to expect 9er left. But when they actually cleared me to make my approach, dialed up the ILS. Again, glide slope wasn't working, but the localizer came in, confirmed for me I was on the right runway. So that was great. Now, even though he gave me progressive taxi instructions, I will say I didn't need them, especially for where I landed. The minute I touched down, you'll see in the video, the tower controller is explaining to me where the turnoff is, and there's only one on that runway. It's at the far end. It's a high-speed turnoff, and he asked me to, give him a good speed on the ground. Keeping safe, he did stress that. But because I had aircraft landing behind me, I had another plane coming in that was on a 3-mile final, so I needed to get out of the way. But yeah, and then I knew, like, every bit of his taxi instruction, while they were progressive instructions, I pretty much knew exactly what he was going to give me without even looking at the diagram because I had studied it that well. Gotcha. Remember I mentioned before the FBO told me there wasn't anything special, but there was one thing. You'll see it in the video. He tells me the tower controller, who didn't even switch me over to ground, by the way. It was just I stayed with tower the whole time. As I turn on to the last taxiway, he tells me contact the FBO on Unicom to get permission into their ramp. They have 2 entryways. I don't care which one you use. I wasn't prepared for that. That was the one thing that got me. Now, the good news was I had ForeFlight, because the Unicom frequency I had on here was not the Unicom frequency for the FBO. So good thing I had ForeFlight. You'll see that in the video. I start kind of scrambling through looking for the right frequency. Eventually I got in touch with the right people. It was no big deal, and they cleared me in. So that was good. So that's it. That's all the prep work. Now, the other question I've gotten is, what's one thing I would have done differently? Obviously, having the right Unicom frequency for the FBO, I now know I would have done that. But the thing that actually I would have changed, and you'll hear this in the video too, as I'm coming in, I'm talking to Chicago Approach, he asks me if I'd like to do a practice ILS or RNAV or something. And I declined, because I hadn't really prepped for that, and I was just happy to be coming in VFR and landing, right? In hindsight, I wish I had kind of prepped a little bit more and been ready for that. I probably could have, I could have flown an RNAV. I was VFR and flying visual, so if I had done the RNAV, it would have been through ForeFlight, because I don't have a IFR GPS in my aircraft yet. I could have done the ILS. Maybe it would have given me a different runway that had a full ILS. I don't know. But that's one thing I wish I would have done. It just would have been kind of fun to fly one of the published approaches. But in the grand scheme of things, that wasn't what this was about. This was about being able to prove to myself, taking on that challenge of, I'm going to go land at this super busy, super complex airport and prove to myself, not to anybody else, but prove to myself that I can do this. And I did. It was completely successful. I didn't have any trouble with air traffic control. My radio calls, I felt like I was confident throughout, because I knew what was going on at every step. I knew what to expect. And that was a big deal. On the way out, it was the same. I had a little bit of a radio issue on the way out when I was departing, while I was trying to work with ground and working with ground metering. Check that out, by the way. If you're going to fly into a Bravo, go look up what ground metering is and how that works. But even then, I understood. I knew how the airport operated. I knew when they had me departing runway 9 or center that it was going to be an intersection departure from Foxtrot, Foxtrot. Why? Because if you look at the taxi diagram again, you'll see there's one more taxiway behind that, and that's where they cross the traffic that needs to go south, so that they're not crossing them in front of departing traffic. I thought that was kind of neat. So I knew to expect all of that. And so every part of it just made me feel confident, because I knew what was going on. I had no problems talking to ATC, and the struggles you sometimes have when you fly into a new airport, I didn't feel like I ran into those on that day, simply because I was prepared. So I hope this helps. I know this was a long video, a lot of me talking, but people wanted to know. That's what went into this. It was not just I picked up and decided today I was going to go try to fly into O'Hare. It was a lot of prep work. I didn't want to be the pilot that showed up unprepared and caused problems at the 4th busiest airport in the whole wide world. So, I hope you enjoyed. Let me know down below if you've got questions, other things you want to know about. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have. But thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you later.